Okay, it is noon Eastern time. Thank you to everyone who is joining us today. I'm sitting here in Michigan, and as I mentioned to someone earlier today, it's a little bit cold, but we are really excited. We've got some really warm content for everyone today, and I wanted to welcome you to the sixth part of our 7-part fall webinar series today. And so we created these webinar series to really support independent garden centers, to help you to work on your business instead of in your business, and really to take some tangible tools back to your garden center that you can apply and implement in 2023. My name is Jessica DeGraff, and I'm the Director of Retail Accounts here at Proven Winners. And I, along with my colleague Heather Poire, have the really unique opportunity to work with independent garden centers and to really champion what you do, because we know that consumers, you are the source for knowledge, for inspiration, and information, really, for those consumers. And you really are the key piece to help them to be successful. And so our fall webinar series is really all about you. So before we get started today, I wanted to share just a few housekeeping items, and then we'll turn it over to our speaker. So a couple things. Everyone is in listen-only mode today. That said, we absolutely love interaction. So if you have questions, if you have comments, please use the chat or the Q&A icon that is on your toolbar. One of the big questions that we always get, though, is the webinar being recorded? Yes, it is. The link, the URL that you see on the screen below has all of our webinars. So the webinar from today, we'll clean that up. We'll have that recording up and live early next week. So if you love the content, if you feel like your colleagues could really learn from this as well, please share. We absolutely love that information is going out and that we can help others, with some great ideas. But without further ado, I am just so excited to introduce Dr. Bridget Behe today. She's going to be sharing with us about a lot of her eye tracking research. I had the unique opportunity of doing my master's degree with Dr. Behe at Michigan State. Go Green.
Go White.
And Bridget is just an amazing resource in our industry. I think it's a very rare thing in horticulture to have someone who has such a marketing mind, and really someone who is really hyper-focusing in on the data. And by utilizing that data, helping us to make better decisions about how we price, how we merchandise, and how we interact with that consumer and what their needs are. And Bridget is truly one of the best. If you haven't heard from her before, she's amazing at what she does. She also has a podcast called Marketing Munchies, and I'm sure she'll bring that up as well. But I just want to turn it over to Bridget and buckle up, because I know there's going to be some really exciting stuff that she's going to share today.
Well, thanks so much, Jessica. I really appreciate folks taking time out of their busy day to join us. And so good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. I want to share with you, as Jessica said, some of the eye tracking research that we have done in the last few years that will really, I believe, help retailers understand what is going on in the minds of their customers. And I absolutely have to start by thanking the funders. I don't do this research alone or in isolation. And so many facets of the industry contribute to our ability to do this research. And so I really appreciate the input, the investment that they've made for our research. So it's interesting to me as a consumer researcher that if people don't see a product, what goes unseen goes unsold. And this process of buying a plant or really any other product, it happens very, very quickly. And what we're finding is that decision process is usually 3 to 5 seconds, and that is not a lot of time. More importantly, what we want to understand is the information that they see, because that's going to help them make that decision of whether to buy it or not. And so kind of the big picture goal of a lot of this research is understanding how you, the retailer, can design the environment, how you can merchandise product in your favor in order to get more sales from the display. And so understanding that information that consumers are connecting with visually, because if it goes in the eyes, it will go to the brain and they can think about that. So how do we engineer that environment to be more in your favor and hopefully more in favor of the consumer? So let's talk about two types of cues or two pieces of information, two categories of information. The first one is we would classify as intrinsic cues. Now, these are things that we really cannot see visually, but we might need that information to make a decision. So for example, this pepper is a hot pepper. And so we can't look at that pepper plant and know visually that it's a hot pepper. We have to be told that that pepper has some spice. The same is true for organic production. You can't simply look at a product and understand or know that that was grown organically. Now, the extrinsic clues are things that we can see. We know it's a pepper. If we know some vegetable plants, we could look at those leaves and identify that as a pepper. Another really important extrinsic cue is the price. We can also see whether a product is branded or not. And we see that it's in a yellow container, which may not have a lot to do with the purchase decision, but it's a cue, an extrinsic cue that we could use to make the decision. So these intrinsic cues are often described either as credence attributes or experience attributes. I'm going to talk more about that in just a second. While the extrinsic cues we would classify them as search attributes. So it's sometimes these search attributes that help us initially make a decision or narrow the field, but we know that consumers get a lot from credence and experience product attributes. Let's talk about those more specifically. So the search attributes, as I just said, are readily evaluated before the customer makes a purchase. And these are things that we tell consumers we want them to get the right plant in the right place. So we see here the sign, planted in full sun, spaced at about 2 feet apart. It's going to grow 10 to 14 inches high. Those are some things, attributes that help us get the right plant in the right place. What the foliage looks like, or the foliage color, kind of the shape of the plant. And it's important to understand how tall or how wide that plant grows. And we can't make a decision without the price. But when we think about the value that we're communicating, there's not a lot of value in those search attributes. Where do consumers realize this search attribute is what the plant is? But it's really the experience attributes and that help to enhance the perceived value. So things, for example, like the peppery flavor of arugula. I love arugula, and I love that nice peppery flavor. If you're looking for shrubs or trees that have fall color, you really have to experience that, because oftentimes we can't experience that in the garden center. We really can't understand whether a flower is disease or insect resistant. Sometimes we have to experience that. But it's these experience attributes that really lend a lot of value. Some product features are experience attributes. For example, you could run your hands over the rosemary in the garden center and experience that fragrance. But things like fall color, that's really tough to experience in the retail garden center. Now, really, where we communicate the most value are in these, what we would call credence attributes. These are things that are very difficult to evaluate in the garden center. And so we have to talk about them. We have to put this information in signage. We don't understand, or we just can't look at a plant and tell that it is drought tolerant. We can't understand that it was grown sustainably. We also cannot look at some of these plants and understand some of the benefits that plants bring. And it's these credence attributes that really give us the why of why we should buy a plant, what it's going to do for that consumer. That's where the greatest perceived value is. Yet think back to that sign. And we've got to have those search attributes, but the real value is something essential to communicate, just as essential as those search attributes. But the credence attributes are really where we show customers the greatest value. So now let's get into some of the eye tracking research and understanding what the eyeballs for the consumers, what they're looking at in order to make a plant choice. And just kind of some background, we're using this, what we call cue utilization theory. And what it says is we are going to buy a plant, some type of plant. And so there's a number of pieces of information or cues, intrinsic cues, extrinsic cues, but we have to attend to them visually before we can use that, understand it, process it, and then make the product choice. So if we can get eyeballs on that cue, we understand that consumers have the capacity to think about it. Now, we use these really cool high-tech eye tracking glasses. The manufacturer is Tobii, not really that important, but what is important is to understand that we've got a couple of cameras in these eye tracking glasses, 2 cameras per eye. There's a microphone, so if people talk, we can pick up what it is that they say. Now, the university requires us, when we work with people, they are fully informed about what these glasses do. They really don't have any negative consequences. And it's also important that you understand that we compensate our participants. It's hard to get people to participate in a study. And so those are, would it cause some bias? It may cause a little bit of bias because they know they're being watched, but we're hopeful over a number of participants that is really minimized. So let's look at some of the results. And I've shared some of this before, but this is really important information. People visually see the information they want or they need to make a decision incredibly quickly. So if we look at this study for how people made their decision, if most people made their purchase decision about what the kind of plant it was it a petunia? Was it a begonia? Some of them, 10%, made the decision to buy based on how it was grown, sustainably, organically, or conventionally. And some, about 17% of our sample in this study, made their decision based on price. Now, what I want you to see is that if they made the decision based upon how it was grown, physiologically, they saw that information faster than the folks who made their decision based on the kind of plant or the price. If they made their decision based on the kind of plant, it was incredible. They saw the plant material faster. These are seconds and statistically significant differences, faster than the folks who made the decision on how it was grown or price. And what do you think about price? Well, if they made their decision based on price, they visually got to see, their eyeballs found that information faster on average than the other 2 groups. What does this tell us? People are going to seek out that information that they want very, very quickly. And if we continue to make price the headline, we're pretty much forcing them into making that decision based on price. There's a lot of other information we can share with them other than how it was grown. But by managing what information is on that side, remember, we can't tell simply by looking at these plants. A lot of those credence attributes, people need to be told. So this tells us that they will find it very quickly and make the decision. We just need to manage that decision a little bit better. So let's look in more detail about those kinds of cues and how many cues people are using to make that purchase decision. So unless you've been living in a rock the last year or 2, you probably have heard me talk about these very important articles that Melinda Knuth and Charlie Hall put together to assimilate the information about the many benefits that plants bring to our lives. And so they put together the research-based information to document that plants give us psychological benefits, educational, social, emotional, physiological, or exercise benefits, as well as aesthetic benefits. So if you don't have a copy of those articles, please send me an email. I'm happy to share them with you for free. But what Mel and Charlie did was they did your homework for you. They put that research-based information together. So now when we communicate this information to consumers, for example, being around plants helps you concentrate better. Being around plants lowers your blood pressure. It is a healthy physical activity. Being around plants makes you happy. We've got the research-based information. And so what we did in this study was to see, how does that benefit information influence the purchase decision? So not every study will answer all the questions. So this is a pretty simplistic study. But what we did was we showed consumers a sign with the plant name, the price, and we put the price either the top, the middle, or the bottom. And then also on the sign, and I'll give you, this is not the most creative sign, but we did this so we could experimentally understand what people were looking for. We either put something about the plant, we put a feature, like it was produced color all summer long, or a benefit that plants make you happy. And then we moved the sign either to the left, the middle, or the right side of this small display. Well, here are some of the results. It's important that you understand that these were digitally identical plants. And what we see here is the information on the sign: price only, a feature, so it requires full sun or it grows this tall, or a benefit. And so at the low price, the digitally identical plants at the low price, what facilitated purchase intention most was just the price. Yeah, the feature and the benefits were important, but really what drove the purchase intention or the purchase decision was that price by itself. It was perceived as a good value. Now, at a moderate price point, we needed the combination of features and benefits to help drive that purchase decision. What was most interesting to us was at the highest price point, what really drove that purchase decision was the benefit. So what did we learn from this? If we have products that are not easily compared, that are high margin products, we don't have a lot of inventory. If we communicate that benefit information in larger typeface, bigger font, and minimize the price, we're going to help drive that purchase decision. Now, conversely, if we have a real bargain, consumers will perceive that as a good deal. Really, all we need to communicate is the price. But I think more often than not, we need to be working the signage up on this end of the products that we're marketing, because we are trying to drive and preserve margins and to keep margins pretty high. Now, in another study, in a separate study, we wanted to understand who derived these benefits more relative to each other. And these were made mostly comparing baby boomers, but Gen Z and millennials. The Gen Z are represented by the green bars, the millennials are represented by the yellow bars, and the boomers are represented by the red bars. No real difference in the aesthetic benefit for plants, but what we did see was a big difference by the age cohort, where millennials really derived more benefits compared to the younger age or the older age cohort, And so they got a lot of social benefit, or they felt the effect of the social benefit more so than the boomers. Now, that's not to say the boomers didn't experience that, but they didn't experience it as much as the millennials did. So as we communicate this information, we see that it's going to be the millennials who will probably be most responsive to this, but the other age cohorts probably will respond as well. This was another interesting finding where we saw a difference also by the plant that was purchased. What we see here are individuals who purchase flowering plants, plants that have edible parts or produce edible parts, like a tomato plant. You don't eat the plant, but with basil, that would have edible parts, or people who bought both edible plants and ornamental plants. Look who is deriving more benefit from their plants. It's the individuals who are buying both the flowering and the edible plants. So we can encourage folks who are buying either or with some of this information. They will get some of the benefit, but really where we're driving more of that benefit is for folks who are buying both edible and ornamental plants. That was really interesting to us. So it's the millennials who appear to respond most positively to the plant benefits, and the social benefits really scored incredibly high with them. Now let's talk about that for a minute. Where are they deriving most of the benefits from? A lot of this is online conversations. They are not seeing each other as much as they used to. It's, coming back since COVID, but they're really engaging with each other online, and social media is incredibly powerful as both a communication tool between the customers themselves, but for us and the customer. And then the educational benefits. And I think we can encourage some of this by posting problems and solving that plant problem. What's wrong with my tomatoes? They're brown at the bottom. Well, maybe that's a calcium deficiency, and here's how we prevent it, and here's how we might resurrect it. And then absolutely taking advantage of the finding that the people who are buying both edible and ornamental, cross-merchandising, encouraging people who are buying edible plants to also buy ornamental plants and vice versa. We can cross those botanical lines in a container and really boost the benefits that folks are deriving. Another study that we did with Alicia Reen, we were looking at comparing the benefits of having feature-based information. We talked about that a little while ago versus the benefit information. We showed consumers two plants at two different prices, different combination of plants, and the benefit messages that we showed them were these. Plants can help you relate socially. They can improve your physical well-being. Plants can help improve your emotional and mental health and well-being. And what we found in this particular study, that the different plant benefits absolutely increased likelihood to buy. And it was the mental health benefit that resonated best with all of the age cohorts. Now, we did this in comparison to the baby boomers. But we know in the United States that we're having an epidemic of anxiety. And so here we can use plants as a wonderful antidote, or at least something to help reduce some of the anxiety that Americans are experiencing by talking about some of these mental health messages. We can go back to the Hall and Knuth articles and pull out that research-based information. And I would encourage you, if you want to start testing some of these messages, I would start with some of the mental health benefit messages, because those are the things that are really going to resonate with people of all different age groups. What we also found was that the benefit messages increased likely to buy differentially depending on where the consumer made their purchase. So we had individuals buying plants at grocery stores, independent garden centers, mass merchandisers, home improvement stores, online, and we also had a group who did not buy plants. What was funny was the people who do not buy plants, they were even less likely to buy when we showed them the social benefit message. But look at the IGCs, positive across all kinds of benefit messages, and that wasn't necessarily true for people who bought plant material at the other retail outlets. So what we find from this is the why, the benefits really help to create the greater perception of value than simply what. Features are important, but benefits really are the drivers of value. What helps you make the choice, those search attributes help you make that choice, but the why gives you the real reason to make the purchase. Most plant benefits increase the likelihood to buy. And again, compared to the baby boomers, those mental health benefits are really powerful when we're thinking about particularly younger consumers. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the buying local, because this is a key why for many consumers. And simply looking at a plant, you can't tell where it was grown. So they need to be told that the plant was grown locally, and many of you are growing plants on your own facility. Schwartz's had here in Michigan, over in Southeast Michigan, they have some really nice signage talking about, and they're close to the Ohio border, talking about all Michigan grown plants, and they're thanking folks for buying locally. We know from research that I did not do this, but we know from other research that the more consumers identify with their local geography. So here in Michigan, people who are from the Upper Peninsula or Upers really identify strongly with that. So the more people are likely to identify with their local geography, the more they're likely to buy local products versus something that was shipped either out of state or imported from another country. Particularly here in Michigan, that's an important detail. And another thing that our research group and other research groups has found is that is much easier for people to visually process an image compared to text. So I'm going to encourage you to use some sort of imagery, a symbol, a seal. This is our Michigan grown, Michigan great, our new logo for Michigan grown products, or even making your own and talking about it being locally owned and locally grown. We understand, you've heard the saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words. People process images, symbols, seals, or marks much more quickly. And so in order to get that across to them, think about employing either something your state has produced or making your own. Sure, you can put that in text, but it also makes the signage a little bit prettier, not to mention the fact that it gets processed so quickly. Want to switch gears yet again and talk about some of the concerns that customers have. And there's a Harvard Business Review a little over a year ago, that article that caught my attention called the Net Positive Manifesto. And this question was really what caught my attention. Is the world better off because your company is in it? Consumers today, many of them are concerned about water availability, water quality, pollution, pollinators. And so when we think about some of those credence attributes, we also need to be thinking about some of the environmental benefits that our company and the products that we sell bring to consumers. The Hartman Group does some really great graphics, and I just love these infographics. And one of them was that 72% of consumers are willing to pay more to support companies that share their values. Are you, as a company, talking about your values on your website and through signage in the store? Only 22% of consumers in their study could identify a sustainably produced product. a lot of you are growing products sustainably or sourcing it from growers who are producing it sustainably. And yet only 17% of consumers in their work could identify a sustainable company. And they're calling this the opportunity gap. And if you think about this, most consumers, and I bet you do too, want to feel good about the company that they're spending their hard-earned dollars with. And so when all things are equal, you want to patronize a company that shares your values and is a good steward of the environment. So we really need to think about leading with the why and closing with the what, because it's the why that motivates. Yes, we need those search attributes, but the why is really the big driver of value. Another shift of gears. Let's look at some of the work that we did just before the pandemic about reading displays. This is an integral part of what consumers, their visual behavior is so important to the construction of displays. And HRI funded a lot of this work, and I want to share it with you because I think this will help you engineer your displays more in your favor, in a more positive manner. So let's look at a couple of the studies. The first one has to do with flat displays, and this would be what I would call a kind of a benchtop display, a horizontal or a flat display. So we had about 90 consumers. We paid them, as I said earlier, and they viewed a randomized set of displays. We had a very small display with 6 plants, a medium display with 12 plants, and then a large display. And I know 24 plants is not a large display, but for the study, it was. And we only had 2 prices, either a low price or a high price. So what we see here is an example of the 12 plant display. So it's 4 by 3, not real big, flat or horizontal. And you can see the price is designated here, $3.99. It was a 4-inch pot, very simple sign. Now with the eye tracking glasses, one of the things we can do is look for, these are called heat maps. They show us areas of intense visual connection, or where did people look the most. And so it was these white impatiens that attracted a lot of attention, relatively speaking. But we also see visual activity on the sign and a couple of the other big areas of color concentration. But statistically, they're telling us where they're looking, but we don't understand how much relative to the other areas they're looking. So we did some analyses, and this compares the 12 plant low price to the 12 plant high price. And what we really started to see in some of these studies is that consumers are ignoring the corners of think about this flat display, they're ignoring the corners. And so what is in the center of that, a lot of times in these displays, was really what was capturing their attention. When we looked at this in greater detail, what we saw was when we moved from 6 to 12, there was another study, we used 18 plants, and to 24. This graph shows us their non-attendance, or what percent of the plants are they not looking at. When you only have a few plants, they're ignoring very little, less than 10%. But remember, we talked about a 24 plant display is not that big, and yet they're ignoring almost a quarter of the plants in that display. You think about some of these more massive displays, they are not visually connecting with all the plant material. There were simply too many choices. Let's look at a couple other findings. When we look at the average time that they spent looking at their choice plant, again, not very much time when they have more choices are they spending looking at that plant that they're going to end up buying. And that's not necessarily a really good thing. Now, what was interesting was we did not see a price effect. So it didn't matter whether the product was a high price or a low price. What mattered was how many plants were in that display. And we know Iyengar and Lepper published this very famous jelly study that showed that when you have more choices, it's harder for people to make the choice. Now, in the practical sense, we know these flat fixtures in the retail garden center can be less expensive, and we can do massing of plants on these displays, but I really don't believe that those are the best kinds of displays for high margin items. Save this type of merchandising for a lower margin, faster moving, less profitable item, because people are going to scan some of this, ignore the corners, not spend very much time looking at their choice, and grab something from that display. We followed this up with another study, again, HRI funded it, where we used a tiered display, so stepwise, because we wanted to see how are people looking at this very differently. Now, in this particular study, we did not vary the price at all, mostly because we didn't see a price effect in the last study. So you've heard the phenomenon of the top shelf. Well, we wanted to understand, how does the number of genera in a display influence purchasing, and how do these different steps play a role in visual behavior? Now, we used flowering perennials and flowering shrubs. The shrubs were not in flower. We rotated plants through the displays, and I'll point you to the article if you want to read all the gory details. But let's talk about the merchandising. So these displays had 3 steps: either merchandise the genera horizontally or vertically. We wanted to see how did the visual behavior changed when we kind of made things a vertical stripe versus a horizontal stripe. So here are the single genus, what you would call the mass display. These are on the tiers for the perennials and for the flowering shrubs. So one genus only. And then if you look at these, what you see are the perennials merchandised either horizontally or vertically. And again, we did some change up so we could understand not whether it was the plant, but the position that the plant was in. We have the similar setup for the woody shrubs, 2 genera merchandised vertically and 3 genera merchandised horizontally. What we found was in the homogeneous or the one genus display, we got most of the choice, almost half, from not ignoring the corner on here, but they were reading the display very much like reading a book, and the top shelf phenomenon was there. We saw that also when we merchandised horizontally, we were able to get a higher percentage of choice from that top shelf relative to the other 2 shelves. Now, what happened when we striped them vertically, we saw a change in visual interaction. And so now we've made the eyes not go across, but they're going down. And so a lot more of the choice was from the bottom shelf. And we also found that with the perennials, we were able to manipulate visual attention simply by making the stripes go horizontally or vertically. In many of the cases, the corners that are shaded here in gray were also ignored. And so there's a central gaze theorem that tells us that vision tends to go to the middle of whatever that field is that we're looking at. So we see here some parallel in the corners being ignored. So how you merchandise product of the same genus or different genera is really going to influence how consumers view the display. If you have really cool stuff and you're doing those horizontal stripes, put the best stuff, the higher margin stuff, the prettier stuff at the top, and then you're more likely to get that sold relative to the other 2 stripes. Now, if you're merchandising vertically, what I think you want to do is end up on that lower right-hand corner even though those corners are still being ignored, but putting it over on that right-hand side, because that tends to be where their vision kind of finishes, and they're more likely to make that purchase there. But it's just such a cool finding that we can change how they read the display simply by changing how we're merchandising. We did a study, again, HRI funded, thank you so much, HRI, that we call the shopper's journey. Now, the studies that I talked about were done in a lab. And so for the very first time, we boldly went into 4 retail garden centers in Michigan who very generously let us come in. We were able to recruit shoppers from their mailing list, from their email list. And what we invited them to do was to come into a pre-scheduled time into the retail store. And we asked them to wear the eye tracking glasses. They signed the consent form, understood what we were asking of them. We gave them $25 incentive, but we also gave them $10. And we said, okay, here's your task. We want you in this busy retail environment with all of its distractions and messiness and you and your cell phone, and maybe you brought a kid or a friend. We want you to buy a plant for $10 or more because we want to understand that process. Now, I'm going to show you a short clip, and I want you to follow the red line and the white circle, because the white circle shows you exactly where the consumers are looking, and the red line helps you to understand how that vision is moving. So this was in.
Does this like more sun than shade, or?
It can take.
Actually, I could have read it.
I don't think it can take bright light.
Yeah, bright indirect. Okay, so on my front porch that gets some sun, it'll do fine.
Yeah.
I'm trying to replace one I lost a long time ago. Do you have them in one size smaller? Probably not. Oh, but so tiny. Yeah. Okay. All right. No, can't compare.
Sorry.
And that's okay. No, I get to spend money.
I know, I heard. That's awesome.
This is great. This is
So you see how fast that went. It went incredibly quickly. And Mary Tusky and Kaiwan Richardson, 2 students, and also my technician, Lynn Sage, they went through hours and hours of this video. And, you know, we talked about extrinsic clues and intrinsic cues, and we narrowed it down to the 67 people who made a flowering annual plant purchase. And I want to talk about some of the information that they used. So the most often thing done was touching or holding a plant. And for our 67 annual plant buyers, they spent on average, these are seconds, they spent on average about a minute out of the 10-12 minute shopping experience touching or holding the plant, 11% of their time. The next most often activity that they did was read or view a plant tag. Why? They're trying to understand more of those selection cues. What's that? What is that plant? Because we need that in order to make the purchase decision. 8% of their time was spent looking at the plant tag information. The third most important, or the thing that took the third most time, was interacting with employees. And why do you think that is? There's more information that they would like to have that they probably didn't get. And in fact, a third of our 67 people interacted with employees. That's a really important thing. And remember, these were consumers recruited from that particular garden center, needing that additional information in order to make the purchase decision. And then reading or viewing information signs was the fourth activity that took up almost 2% of their time in the purchase process. I show you this information because we have an opportunity, and I hear some of you saying, well, consumers don't read the signs. we don't need to put a ton of information on there, but we need to be very strategic about the information that we put on there. Some of the what they're going to get from the tags, we need to get more why information. What are the benefits? That's what needs to go on more of the signage and less cluttered signage. Now, I'm going to show you this last piece because to me, this was one of the more interesting findings. When we look, these little dots show the mean or the average, but the bars show the standard deviation. A good way to think about that is, what was the variation between the consumers who did something a lot versus the consumers who did something very little? And what we see for the cell phone, for the touching of the plant, and for the viewing of the price sign, we see these big variations. And so there were people who used their cell phone very little, but there were also people who used their cell phone a lot. We suspect they were looking at pricing information, but this needs to be studied further. Look at the big variation in the number of people who didn't touch plants very much or who touched plants a lot. To me, this has tremendous implications for online purchasing, because if we understood more about the people who didn't physically interact with the plants versus the people who did that a lot, maybe we can engineer that online environment better. And then the price sign. Look at this. There were people who practically spent 10% of their time looking at prices. That's not where we want their visual attention. However, there were people who hardly spent any time looking at the price sign. Again, I want you to think about, these were 67 people in an open garden center in May, which is spring for us here in Michigan. We really need to think more tactically about how we engineer this environment to get more information that benefits us and potentially benefits our consumers, rather than continuing to focus and make price the headline. Now, just to summarize some of this, everyone touched a plant or a tag. Almost everyone viewed the plant or the price information. What also was interesting was half of the customers in the study looked at someone else's cart. Cart envy? I think you should try this spring. Get a plainclothes employee, somebody who isn't wearing the garb identifying them as an employee, to push around some cool product in the store. And maybe we're going to get more eyeballs looking in that cart saying, wow, they have something I think I might like to have. Think it's worth considering. And then 1/3 interacted with a store employee. And again, they're not new, and they averaged 5% of their time. I think they're hungry for some of that credence information. They want to know a little bit more about that plant. I'm not saying we need to cover up signs with all kinds of information. We need to be more selective about some of the key attributes and some of the key benefits that plants will give us, because they are looking for more information. So we know plant benefits generate more perceived value than simply those search attributes. We've got to put those plant benefits first or larger than some of the features and the price, because that's where the real perception of added value is coming from. I didn't show the slide from the study we did, but I'll just remind you, higher prices are seen faster than lower prices, and they're seen faster on the left than on the right. Again, strategically placing information, put the price low and to the right-hand side so we can get people to look through more of that information rather than making them decide, particularly at 10 or 20 feet away, that that's too expensive. Bring them in, draw them in with some of the benefit information. Make sure they're getting the right plan in the right place, but start off by building that perceived value. We also know that consumers need to look away in order to decide. So if we give higher margin product a little more space, they can then focus on some of those products individually. Merchandising matters, really. We need to think about using that horizontal layout for lower margin items, and the corners get ignored. So I'm going to say it's okay to make that look like a couple of plants were selected from that somebody maybe picked the corner. You don't have to have perfect displays. On the tiered displays, think about that top shelf phenomenon and how we can change visual interaction with the vertical striping. A lot of physical interaction with plants. Some people are going to want to pick up and touch those. We need to think about a little differently. How can we get them some of that information? What are some of the implications for online shopping? And then obviously the big take-home message. Signs really matter. What you put on them and the order of that information is absolutely critical to the purchase decision. Please don't ever make price the headline unless you're having some sort of big sale, which I am not a big fan of. I'm going to finish up here before we take some questions and just remind you that I've taken a bit of a hiatus. It's been a very busy fall for me, but I will restart the Marketing Munchies the first of the year. But there are free 10, 15-minute Marketing Munchies podcast episodes available on my website, Connect to Consumer. And so I'm happy for you to get on there and listen to some of the episodes that we have published. Also, the longer peer-reviewed articles are on the same website. So if you'd like to read some of the research studies in more detail, those are also available for free there for you. So I'm going to take a little sip of water there and get Jessica to come back. I think I'll stop the share and we'll just see what the participants today are thinking and questions they have.
Sure. So Katie said thank you. She's on the line, Bridget. So what I found really interesting when we were looking at the study from Michigan, from the 4 retail garden centers, every single person in that study touched the plant, right? And you mentioned that. So what are your thoughts on, obviously with signage, you talk a lot about the credence attributes and the benefits. What are your thoughts on, especially with plants that have soft foliage or they're fragrant, that cue, right? Because the more they touch it, the more likely they're very likely, I would assume, to purchase that, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, you think about grocery stores, they figured it out a long time ago. If you can get it into the mouth, you're going to get it into the cart. That's why those samplers are there. I don't see enough signage that says touch me or smell me. And I cannot walk past a rosemary plant without touching that and smelling that wonderful fragrance. In Australia, over in Europe, I see more of that signage. And sure, are you going to risk some damage or loss? Yeah, but what you get in return is probably more sales. Have you ever thought about charging more for a fragrant plant? When we're kids, what do we do when we see a flower? Bend down and smell it. And yet a lot of that fragrance has been read out of it in exchange for other attributes. And so reward consumers who are curious with, wow, that feels really good or really soft or really fuzzy, particularly kids. Kids are kind of a gateway to the parents, but encourage them to touch and smell not all of the plants. But I think, again, you can be strategic about that and see what happens to sales with really great point of sale system. We can understand, we put that fragrant sign in there or we put that touch me sign in there. You can see in a week or two if that had an influence on sales.
Yeah. We had a really great question that just came in and they were asking, do I seem to track on signage in a similar fashion as on the plant display? So do you see the same sort of movement on the sign as you do on the plant display, or is it different?
No, it's very, very similar. And that's a great question because my hypothesis is, and the more I read about this and do this, I think when we in our culture learn to read from left to right and from top to bottom, that's visually how we process information fastest. And so when we saw those vertical stripes, we've interrupted that smooth pursuit, that flow. absolutely consumers are reading signage the very same way, which is why I believe they saw higher prices faster on the left than they did on the right, and faster on the top than they did on the bottom. So I'm going to tell you, bury that price information, put it on the bottom, put it there, but in smaller typeface, in smaller font, because you want them to see from 30 or 50 feet, I'm fragrant, as opposed to $9.99.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I was looking at, when you started the presentation talking about the credence attributes, drought tolerance was the example. We're seeing a very similar movement in that I kind of liken it to solution-based gardening, right? I want plants that are drought tolerant or low maintenance or pollinator attractors. And I think the beauty of that at a garden center is it gives them so much more flexibility with their merchandising.
Right.
If that's the credence attribute, it's whatever looks great that fits that criteria for the end cap.
Exactly. And that's what's going to draw consumers in. And then you can make sure you get the right plant in the right place. Maybe you have some very sun tolerant plants and some very shade tolerant plants in the solution-based setting. That the why is going to drive me in, and then I can decide what is the best plant for that particular place, as opposed to saying, well, that one looks too expensive from 50 feet, so I'm just going to keep moving. But yeah, I agree completely. That's solution-based, because I can't look at a plant and tell that it's drought tolerant or that it's pollinator friendly. I simply can't do that.
Yeah. I know a hot topic, obviously, that's come back around. QR codes have been around a long time, but there's a lot of conversation about, do I put QR codes on my signage? Do I not? What's your thought process on that?
I strategically, again, I think that can be really helpful. And where I like QR codes the best is a suggestion on edible plant parts or plants uses for that. I think there are a lot more recipes. I think that food is still a very hot product category. And if people knew how to use it a little bit better, I think that would be helpful. But you don't want to have this rows and rows of identical soldiers all with QR codes on them. But I think strategic use, particularly higher margin items, particularly new or unique items, we can enhance what consumers know about that, get some of those whys, why I should buy this, through the QR code, and then hopefully get more of that in the cart. Now, I think QR codes would be great on tags, because if people are picking up the tags at the rate we believe they are, and we could get that QR code big enough that they could shoot that with their cell phone camera, that might be a really good solution.
Yeah, we actually have those on our annual tags. So yeah, I think QR, the codes are certainly coming back. There's a lot of folks that are asking that question. Do you, on your website, Bridget, have ideas for, I know we talk an awful lot in our industry about features, right? It's 2 feet by 2 feet and not as much about the benefits. Do you have any information on your website about here are the top the benefits of the plants that you really want to make sure that garden centers are talking about?
Well, I would send them all to the Hall and Knuth articles, because those benefits, particularly the mental health and well-being benefits, it is not, to create an analogy, greenwashing. When you are conserving water in your business, when you are using less toxic insect management strategies, when you can point to research that says being around plants improves concentration, lowers blood pressure, you point people to that evidence-based body of knowledge, you can say that in full confidence. And those are the things that I think, especially today, are going to resonate with more consumers. And we could change that every single day on the website. Harder to do on the signage, but every single day you could do something different with some of those, again, higher margin plants, and really pique that curiosity, that interest that consumers have looking for plants in different situations. But yeah, I would just go back to the Hall and Knuth articles, because they are truly a wealth of information.
That's great. Well, Bridget, thank you so much. I'm going to show one quick slide here, and then we are going to end the conversation today, but lots of great details and information. Thank you so much. I did want to mention that we have one more webinar in our fall series. That's next Tuesday, December 13th, and that is with Ann Obarski of Merchandise Concepts. And she's going to be talking a little bit about strategies to keep your customers on your doorstep. So ways to bring more customers into your garden center in spring. Dr. Behe's presentation today is recorded. We will have the recording up and on our website next week, so you can get the recording at the link on the screen. Highly recommend, share that information. As Bridget mentioned, there's a lot of great tips. Bury that price. A lot of folks are talking about price, especially as we move into 2023, and I think these are some great tips. And really a great opportunity right now to look at your signage and how your signage is speaking to your customer. With that, sincerely want to thank everyone for joining us, and sincerely thank Dr. Behe for sharing of your time and your talents. Our industry is so much better because you're in it and because you bring really some tangible opportunities for garden centers to be better and to better communicate with their customers. So thank you for that. And thank you all. Wishing you all, if you don't join us next week, wishing you all a very wonderful holiday season, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jessica.